The message here is that the organism isn't trying to live as long as possible. If it were trying to live as long as possible, the more food it has, the more resources, the easier its life is, the better a job it would do. No, when life is easy, when you don't have to exercise, you don't have to work, when the temperature is just right, when you don't have any toxins in the environment, when you have plenty to eat, that's when life is shortest. Aging is terrible for fitness, yet aging seems to have been selected by evolution. It's not just an accident.
Dr. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Isn't that what
Yeah.
everybody says?
Yeah, and we just said that everyone is excited as well to have the guest on the podcast with an amazing guest every time, which is true in my opinion this time because you've written quite an interesting and thought-provoking book about aging and longevity, which we're going to get into. But my first initial question would be, you have a background in physics, you started off in physics, so what made you, I guess, a pivot or get more interested in aging research?
Well, I'll comment first that all of the revolutionary changes come from somebody outside the science. And in particular, all of the big insights that have changed biology have come from people who aren't biologists coming into the field and saying, "Oh, you got that wrong." So I'm in a good tradition. Without comparing myself to some of the real um, bright lights in the field. I mean, Schrodinger came in and predicted DNA in 1948 or something, long before there was knowledge of what DNA was. Um,
Mm,
Haldane. There are many good examples of people coming into physics and offering insights into biology. So yes, I was a physicist before I was a biologist. It was 1996. I read an article in Scientific American by Weindruck describing caloric restriction experiments, and that this wasn't just an anomaly with mice. Every organism they tried it with, the less they feed them, the longer they live. And I thought, the message here is that the organism isn't trying to live as long as possible. If it were trying to live as long as possible, then the more food it has, the more resources, the easier its life is, the better a job it would do. No, when life is easy, when you don't have to exercise, you don't have to work, when the temperature is just right, when you don't have any toxins in the environment, and when you have plenty to eat, that's when life is shortest. So whatever it is that's causing the limit of lifespan, it's not that the organism is trying to do its best, but there are just these things in its way. So that was
mm,
the initial insight. Before I knew anything else, I had a sense aging is an inside job. 1996.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, you're describing these examples of color restriction that pretty universally across all species have been shown to extend lifespan. And I think the longest life extension in history comes from calorie restriction a few decades ago, where it was up to like 65% life extension through calorie restriction in mice, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, that you would predict that an abundance of resources would extend lifespan, but actually that mild restriction or let's say these positive stressors, which is in biology is called hormesis, that these minor
Hormesis.
stressors,
Yes.
yeah,
So it's
minor
just an
stressors
example.
extend.
Caloric restriction is just one example of hormesis, and there are many
Mm,
others. Even radiation. Yeah, I mean, you think of radiation as toxic. It causes free radicals, it kills cells. Um, if anything should shorten lifespan, it's radiation, and it does if you get a high enough dose. But
right.
low dose radiation increases lifespan against all of our expectations.
Mm. Yeah, and sunlight is a form of mild radiation that is healthy and is needed for optimal health in some amounts. But you mentioned that aging, or at least in your book, you talk about how aging is more like a programmed into the organism. That, or what is like evolutionarily? Why did we evolve to age? What is the reason it happens in the first place?
Well, there's the paradox that I realized right away in 1990. So I didn't know anything about how evolutionists think. I didn't know about the selfish gene. I didn't know that there's no such thing as group selection. It's only individual selection. But in 96, I had this idea. I wrote it up. And remember, there was no spam in 1996. There were people on listservs, and they were academic, and they expected that anybody who was coming to them on this listserv is sincere, and not trying to sell them something, not trying to scam them. The good old days of the internet. So,
Mhm.
1996, I wrote up the ideas that I just described to you, that aging must be an inside job based on this. I sent it out to a listserv of several thousand um, evolutionary biologists, and I got dozens of responses. Of course, you wouldn't have that experience today. People would just send your message to the spam folder today. But in 1996, I got dozens of responses, and they were all telling me the same thing. No, you don't understand. It's not possible for evolution to positively select for a shorter lifespan. Fitness is about living a long time and having more offspring. That's what fitness is. We know this as a matter of theory, and it's called the selfish gene theory or neo Darwinism, or sometimes called the new synthesis, although new means it was new in 1930. Um, and they referred me to a book by George Williams from 1965. They said, Adaptation and Natural Selection by George Williams. Read that and you'll understand it all.
Mhm. Gotcha. Right. So you're referring to that if the selfish gene is a concept created by Richard Dawkins, that your genes are the ones who are trying to keep themselves alive, and all your behavior is motivated by that end, or like you're basically being hijacked by your genes, that your behavior is directed to the end of the genes, or the goals of the genes. And in that perspective, then like longevity would be also beneficial to the genes. That if you live longer, then that would be, that directly positive for the genes as well, to their survival. But in your mind, it doesn't really work out like that way.
Well, we're still back in 1996. I didn't know any of this. Just a slight footnote on what you said. The Selfish Gene book was written by Dawkins, but he was describing concepts that were not his. The concepts were from Ronald Fisher, R.A. Fisher, who really gave us the field of quantitative
Mhm.
evolutionary theory in the work that he did in the 1920s and 30s, um, combining statistical. He gave us a lot of the techniques that are used in modern statistical analysis. And um, how do you report your experiments? A lot of that comes from Fisher. He was a remarkable mathematician, and he gave us the idea of the selfish gene, although he didn't use the word. It's all about how many copies of your genes are in the next generation. So a genetic variation that contributes to more copies of itself and the next generation has positive fitness and will continue to survive. A genetic variation that causes less copies of itself and the next generation is bound to die out slowly, slowly or rapidly, depending on how much the difference is. And that was the accepted definition of fitness. It has nothing to do with the group, what's good for the community. And that was very clear in George Williams's 1965 book. He said, look, you guys that are talking about group fitness and fitness is a property of the community, not just the individual, you're all wet. You don't understand the gift that Ronald Fisher has given us. He's given us a quantitative definition of fitness. The quantitative definition is, are there more copies of this gene in the next generation than there were in the last generation, or less copies? That's what fitness is all about. And if you look with that narrow lens, which I call Darwin in a straitjacket, if you look with that narrow lens at aging, what do you see? You see, well, there's no way that having a shorter lifespan can contribute to more copies of your genes in the next generation. Oh, what do I mean, no way? Well, there's an objection you might raise. Well, um, once you stop reproducing, then there's no motivation to keep you alive. So, yes, why do you stop reproducing is the question, not why do you have a curtailed lifespan? Why do you die? Yeah, it's true that if you stop reproducing, you might as well die. But um, the big question is, why is there menopause? And the equivalent in males, not quite the equivalent, but the analog in males, we lose fertility over time as well, although not as drastically or as suddenly as women do.
Mm,
You step back, it's not just humans. The concept of menopause. For a long time, people wrote, "Oh, it's only in the higher animals that take care of their children and grandchildren that menopause can exist." But you look there; it's throughout the kingdom of throughout the animal kingdom. Many animals um, lose their fertility long before they die. Chickens are notorious for this. They stop laying eggs after a couple of years, but they can live on for many years after that. And the champions are worms. Worms are fertile or lab worms, C. elegans. Lab
mm,
worms are fertile for 2 days and they have lifespans of 20 days. So most of their life, they're, they're infertile. A little more about that. The worms are hermaphrodites, which means they have both sperm and egg in the same worm. They're born with an ability to generate egg after egg after egg after egg, but they have a limited quantity of sperm. They're born with a limited quantity of sperm, and that's all they'll ever have. So they run out of sperm after 2 days, and that's why they can't continue to reproduce. They're going on, they'll live another 15, 20 days after that. They can produce eggs, but the eggs are infertile because they don't have sperm for it. Now, sperm is dirt cheap. It doesn't, I mean, an egg takes metabolic resources to create an egg, but a sperm is just a tiny cell. It's a half a cell, really.
mm.
There's no reason those worms could create more sperm if they wanted to. So the reproductive lifespan of a lab worm is clearly limited by internal programming. It has nothing to do with wearing out or
Mm,
anything like that. It runs out of sperm because of the way it's programmed.
gotcha. Yeah, so the argument would be would be that for the selfish genes, you would die after your reproductive window ends, but we see that you live longer than that. Um, so there is another mechanism or some other process that is determining the maximum lifespan in an organism. In humans, it's thought to be something like 120, maybe even more than that. Um, but most people obviously die much sooner than that. There's like extreme few people who reach that age, or in history there's only one person who reached over the age of 120. But you know what is the reason we die then? What is your thoughts? You mentioned that it's something related to like this inbuilt mechanism that affects aging in humans and our lifespan. So what do you think is the driving force behind that, and what influences it?
In one-celled uh, protists, they run out of telomere, and that's their lifespan. In worms, it's a little more complicated than that. They run out of sperm, and that's the end of their fertile lifespan. Uh, Humans are much more complicated than that, and it's multi-causal. It's still programmed, but there are multiple causes. It's mediated by epigenetics, which means that our gene expression changes as we reach fertility. We turn on sex hormones. And as we reach the end of our growth cycle, we turn off the growth hormones. When we get to age 40, 50, and more towards 60, we are turning on mixtures of hormones and enzymes that are actually destroying us. The best known example is inflammation. There are cytokines that um, determine the level of inflammation globally through the body. And more inflammation is turned on as we get older. And the inflammation is the primary driver of the three biggest diseases of old age: heart disease, stroke, I could put those together, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and Alzheimer's disease um, are the three biggest causes of death from old age. And all of those are very tightly um, connected to inflammation. So just increasing inflammation is a primary driver of aging, and that's programmed into our genes. As we get older, the epigenetics changes so that we turn on these cytokines that cause um, inflammation to be ramped up. That's not the only mechanism. Another one is apoptosis. Apoptosis is programmed cell death, and we need apoptosis. There are cells that are diseased and they need to kill themselves. During development, it's not just that we grow cells wherever we need them. We grow cells for a paw, and all the in-between cells to make fingers commit suicide by apoptosis and disappear. So apoptosis is built into the development process. Apoptosis is the way we avoid cancer. Cancer cells remember, detects that it is a cancer cell, and it commits suicide via apoptosis. So I'm not against apoptosis. Apoptosis is really important. But as we get older, apoptosis is on a hair trigger, and we lose brain cells. Perfectly healthy brain cells are committing suicide every day. We lose muscle cells. It's called sarcopenia. And we're losing muscle mass because our muscle cells are bowing out because of apoptosis. So there's another way in which the programming, the epigenetic programming, is causing us to slowly destroy ourselves with age. Autoimmunity is another way that the body is destroying itself with age. Loss of telomeres is a fourth way that the body destroys itself with age. And again, it's completely avoidable. Every cell in your body is capable of making telomerase and having just as long a telomere as it wants, but it doesn't do that. Instead, every time the cell divides, the telomere gets a little bit shorter until the cell goes into replicative senescence. It uh, it it slows down, can't reproduce anymore, and actually becomes toxic to the rest of the cells when it becomes senescent with a short telomere. Completely avoidable, but it's part of the aging program that cells have a finite lifespan.
Gotcha. So the idea of it being programmed into our genes, a good way to look at it would be that, no matter how healthy someone is, at the age of 60, they're way less healthy and more older aged than someone who is 20 years old, even if their lifestyle was the same all throughout that time frame and they were super healthy. They're gonna be a 60-year-old will always be unhealthier than a 20-year-old, with all things being equal, due to the process of natural biological aging.
That's not quite true. I mean, certainly there are 20-year-olds that are in really bad shape. Today's 20-year-olds, a
Yeah, I'm
lot of
saying
them
like all things equal.
already have diabetes because our diets are so bad, because of uh, the lifestyle that causes people to just stare at screens all day. There are plenty of really unhealthy 20-year-olds out there today. I wouldn't say that every 20-year-old is healthier than every 60-year-old. But
Yeah,
as a
yeah.
general rule, what you say is absolutely true.
Yeah, I'm saying that, okay, if the same person, they had the same lifestyle and the same, they're the same, let's say in an impossible experiment with people following the same lifestyle, then yeah, like the 60-year-old, because of the natural process of aging, there's something that just, goes on during the decades of life, that despite how healthy you are with your lifestyle, you will see aging. The healthiest people will still see aging, and they're going to die at some point. Doesn't matter how healthy their lifestyle is. At least right now, we haven't found a solution to aging and longevity.
But
But the
we're
programming.
close, and I assume we'll get to that before this interview is over.
I want to take a quick break to let you know about my favorite wellness devices, which are the bond charge red light therapy devices. You've probably seen many of your favorite longevity influencers using these red light therapy devices, but do they actually work? Yes, they do. Red light therapy has been shown to have many benefits on skin anti-aging, hormone optimization, pain management, and even exercise performance. I use my device every day for 15 minutes, especially during the winter months when there's not much sunlight. It increases my energy in the morning and makes my skin glow. Just check out the testimonials on the Bond Charge website for the before and after pictures of other people. Most radiotherapy devices don't have the right wavelengths of light, which might mean you're not getting the claimed benefits. Bond Charge uses the exact wavelengths of light used in research, and they also have near-infrared light that's beneficial to the joints. Head over to bondcharge.com and use the code SIIM, SIIM, for a 15% discount. Okay, before we get to that, how do we unprogram the aging? I guess the question is, if it's like a program, then who programmed it? Like, why did depends what someone's religion is as well. But let's say, how did the genes then choose to start aging, and why did it evolve through natural selection?
So this takes me back to 1996 again, and uh, getting these messages from evolutionary biologists that said, you've got to read George Williams's book. You don't understand how evolution works. And I did that. I read his book. I enrolled in, I live near University of Pennsylvania. I live in Philadelphia. So I went to University of Pennsylvania and asked if I could audit some evolutionary biology courses. I did that for a year. I learned how evolutionists think. And at the end of that year, there was a little light that went off. And I said, I understand now. I understand the logic that makes them think that the selfish gene is the primary mechanism of evolution. I understand why they think that group selection, what's good for the community, is a very weak force compared to individual selection, what's best for the individual. I understood that, and yet I still had, on the other hand, this insight that aging is programmed. So I thought, this is a really worthy subject to investigate. This is a real mystery. I understand evolutionary biologists. I understand why they believe this, and it's very convincing to me. And yet, here's the contradiction to that. The contradiction is that aging is terrible for fitness, and yet aging seems to have been selected by evolution. It's not just an accident. Um,
Hmm.
and that's a mystery I reveled in for 5 years.
Yeah.
It was 2001 before the light went off, and I thought I had an answer to that
Mm.
question. And because I'm a physicist, I'm one of the skills I learned as a physicist is computer modeling. So I did all kinds of computer modeling of evolution and aging, and how could evolution select. In one model after another, it failed. Every few weeks I would come up with an idea. Oh, maybe I'll put this into the model. Maybe I'll put that into the model. I came up with countless evolutionary models to um, try to find some mechanism that I could model that would show evolution positively preferring a short lifespan to a long lifespan. And as I say, I did this for 5 years, and really I was still scratching my head at the end of 5 years.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there are, cases from nature of extreme longevity, like very long lifespans. And, some people might say that certain species are also immortal, biologically immortal. So it is, there are examples from nature of natural selection, selecting for extremely long lifespans and possibly immortality already. So maybe you can talk about
Yeah, so,
about.
so I mean, eventually I'll get back to, so what did I find? What is the evolutionary model that successfully um, evolves shorter lifespans in preference to longer lifespans? We'll get to that. But you're asking now about species that have either very long lifespans or no limit on their lifespan at all. They just keep growing and becoming more fertile and less likely to die with each passing year. Um, Sharks may be like that, we're not sure, but clams certainly seem to be the best example among animals. Um, and we're all familiar with the clams that we get for clam chowder, and they're a few years old and they're this big, but clams can continue to grow. If nobody eats them, they grow bigger and bigger and they produce huge numbers of eggs and just send them out into the ocean. And there are known giant clams, 6 feet across, weigh hundreds of pounds, and it's hard to kill at that point. They have no natural enemies when they're that big. They get more fertile. They're laying more eggs with each passing year, and they're harder to kill with each passing year. And as far as we know, there's no aging in clams. They just get bigger and more fertile with each passing year. So there's an example in the animal kingdom of
Mm,
an animal that probably doesn't age. There are others. Lobsters also seem to have this pattern. Turtles, there are some turtles that keep growing and keep becoming more fertile. In the plant kingdom, it's actually much more prevalent. You find many, many plants that have indefinite lifespans. The world champion is aspen trees. Aspen trees don't reproduce primarily by dropping seeds. They reproduce by spreading roots out, and then the root will come up at another place. It's the same plant, but it produces another tree uh,
yeah.
100 feet away. There are aspen groves that have been continuously alive from the same seed for 40,000 years. And as far as I know, those are the oldest living things, these aspen groves that are
Yeah.
tens of thousands of years old.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are some species that also, so like some hydra species go through some form of recycling,
Yeah.
if I'm not correct, that they actually revert back to a younger age and start again from the beginning.
Yeah, that's another really interesting exception to those who say aging is a physical phenomenon, it's wearing out. And because of the second law of thermodynamics, we all have to get old and die. And then you show them the hydra, which, as you say, when it's starved, it it just shrinks down, becomes smaller, and then it
Mm,
goes to its larval stage, and it goes practically all the way to um, to the
yeah.
earliest larval stage coming out of the egg, and it starts life over again
Mm,
once it's refed. Um, it's it's not the only organism. The hydras, let's see, the hydras have some ability to do that. There's a jellyfish called Turritopsis that can do that. There are
mm,
beetles, carrion beetles, that can do that. And those are the three species that I know that are capable of reverting back to the larval stage, starting life anew, and as far as we can tell, they're they've got a second chance. They're young. They have the same lifespan that they would have had if they had been doing it the first time instead of the third or fourth or 10th time.
mm, right. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that in that, I guess, environmental stress or this physiological stress, that's the signal for the hydra to go back to a youthful state. So what's the reason for that? Why does it happen in that scenario? Because that's the cue. Why is it a cue?
Well, when you're starving, you can't. go on as you were before. Uh,
Mm.
I mean, if your plan is to just make more copies of yourself and send them out into the world, you need a plan B.
Mm.
And most organisms don't have a plan B, but these few examples that we uh, listed, they do have a plan B, and the plan B is to just shrink back, become young again, and start life over if I'm lucky enough to be refed. So there's a connected story to this. Right around I was when I was doing my work and getting into this field in the 1990s, Walter Longo was doing his PhD at University of Southern California. He was a grad student, and he discovered that if you have a colony of yeast cells and they run out of food, the yeast cells are starving, that 95% of the yeast cells will commit suicide, apoptosis again, and feed themselves to the remaining 5% to um, increase their lifespan. So, whoa, well, selfish genes, it's impossible. That can't possibly be happening. If there were a gene to be in the 5% rather than the 95%, that's the gene that would take over. Everybody wants to be in the 5%. No one wants to be in the 95%, turning myself into food for their others. So, whatever genetically is causing that, there's a strong, strong evolutionary pressure to be in the 5% and not the 95%. Walter
Mm.
Longo, go back to the lab and look again. This can't be true. And that's what he when he submitted his article, that's what he got. He said, "We know as a matter of theory that what you're reporting can't possibly be true." And he's really smart and really stubborn and a really good experimentalist. So he answered their questions and resubmitted the article, and they sent him back to the lab again and again and again. And it was, I think, 2000, 2001. It was right around then he finally got his article through, and it was published in Nature. By this time, it was bulletproof. Yes, 95% of the yeast cells are killing themselves. What they're doing looks a lot like apoptosis. It has all the biochemical signatures of apoptosis. They're killing themselves for the same, for the sake of the 5%, and they're not genetically different from the 5%. Somehow they're signaling to each other that some of us are going to live and others are going to die, and the ones that are going to die do so willingly.
Wow. Wow. So they collectively decide which one lives or which one doesn't.
So there's the first example of extreme group selection. What they're doing is falling on their sword. It's
Mm.
an extreme example about altruism, sacrificing my life, my reproductive potential. I have no evolutionary progeny of my own. Uh, I'm sacrificing everything for the sake of the community.
Wow. Yeah. So then that's a hint towards why some species die in age.
Yeah. Well, it's an extreme counterexample to the selfish gene idea
Right.
and to the paradigm put forth by R.A. Fisher back in the 1920s and 30s. It can't be the whole story. Selfish genes, yeah, I mean, there's a role for selfish genes in evolution, but it can't be the whole story.
Hmm. Right. Does it apply to humans then as well? So in humans, obviously, nearly half of our life, we or at least the average person tends to not be able to reproduce. Women, in their middle age, they lose the ability to reproduce. Males can reproduce technically to the very end almost. So why in humans then we die? Is it because of we become, I guess, slower, or in a hunter-gatherer setting, we're like becoming worse at gathering food and worse at hunting, or what is the reason that in humans it happens, this kind of aging?
Um, so we're asking for the evolutionary mechanism or we're asking about the metabolic mechanisms. The metabolic mechanisms, I listed a few that and how they work through epigenetics. The evolution in animals is, I think there's a common theme, but in humans it becomes really complicated because we're smart enough to control who reproduces. We get together and decide who's going to reproduce and who isn't. And we have economies that provide
Mm,
more resources to some of
right.
us than others. You could argue that evolution just isn't working in humans in the
Anymore.
sense of survival of the fittest. That
Mm,
that's that doesn't apply to humans anymore. We've taken charge of our own evolution, and to some extent, we've been doing that for thousands of years. So it becomes really complicated in humans. So, with your permission, I'd go back to telling the story. Well, why do most animals, um,
yeah.
almost all animals, why do almost all animals get old and die? And that comes to the answer that I finally came up with after 5 years of trying one uh, mathematical model after another.
Yeah.
What
You can.
the one that I came to is predator prey dynamics. Um, Damon Centola was a grad student at the time, and I didn't take him seriously at first because he was a grad student, but he was the first person who clued me in. You know, predator prey dynamics is really a powerful evolutionary force. You should be looking at this. Um, I later learned that Michael Gilpin had written a whole treatise on predator prey dynamics 30 years earlier, 20 years earlier, in the mid 1970s. He wrote a treatise called Group Selection in Predator Prey Communities. So that was really the first person who discovered that predator prey dynamics is a really powerful evolutionary force. And what does it mean? In one sentence, if you're a community of animals, you depend on a food supply, and there's no sense in reproducing faster than your food species is reproducing. If you reproduce faster than your food species, you're going to eat up everything that's available, and your children are going to starve. It, there's no evolutionary payoff for reproducing faster than your food species reproduces.
Mm,
Eventually, we're all down to plants. I mean, plants is where all food energy comes from, and plants are limited by sunlight. They're not limited by uh, food or anything else in the environment. In some environments they're limited by water, but most environments they're limited by sunlight. So plants are always going to reproduce at a rate that's determined by how much sun are they getting, and animals have to learn that you don't eat all the plants. If you eat all the plants, um,
gotcha.
evolution punishes your children very rapidly. So,
Mm,
so this is an evolutionary force that's very powerful. It can work in one generation. It can wipe out all of your offspring. If your generation outgrows its food supply, if all the lions grow to the point where they can catch the gazelles, the lions run faster than the gazelles. It's easy to catch a gazelle. You eat all the gazelles, and then
mm,
the lions have nothing to eat in the next generation. And that's why lions are a little bit slower than gazelles. They can catch the gazelles that
right.
are older and ailing, and that's a perpetual food supply. The lions are always going to be a small percentage compared to the gazelles. It would be a disaster if you had as many lions as gazelles out there.
Wow.
They would wipe out the gazelles, and then there would be no more lions.
Yeah.
So all animals have learned this. All animals have learned that the selfish gene doesn't work. You
Hmm.
have to limit your reproduction.
Wow.
You have to keep your numbers in line so that you don't use up whatever food supply you depend on. And this is an evolutionary force that's just as fast as individual selection. It can compete successfully with individual selection. In order to keep the reproductive rate down and to keep numbers in check, you have both birth
Mm.
control and death control built into every animal species, or almost all animal species. I just told you that clams may be an
Yeah.
exception. Almost all animal species have birth control and death control built into their physiology so that they can never outgrow their food species. And as I said, evolution will very rapidly punish any species that
Hmm.
that tries to go against this. My favorite example is the Rocky Mountain locust. Um, there were plagues of locusts in America in the 1880s, 1890s, I think right through 1900 something. There were periodic plagues when locusts would just fill the skies. Um, Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote about it graphically as she experienced it when she was growing up. Uh, these clouds, miles and miles long, would come and descend on a neighborhood. They'd completely denude the trees, everything green within within this cloud would be turned into locust meat. And people would say it's disgusting. The whole ground is covered with locusts. You can't walk anywhere without stepping on them. Uh, if you think in terms of selfish genes, they were the ultimate successful species. They were able to turn any green matter into more locust eggs, and they're extinct.
Mm.
There are no
Yeah.
Rocky Mountain locusts left.
Yeah. So if a species is too successful in especially in the predator prey dynamics, that they're too good of a predator, they're gonna kill all of their prey, and that then they're gonna go extinct because they don't have any more food left.
Bingo. So that's the
Yeah.
key to understanding where senescence comes from. It's the key to understanding why the selfish gene theory is only part of the story and
Hmm.
why community selection is a powerful enough force to
Gotcha.
compete with individual selection.
And in the predator communities, then you end up getting these genes that have aging built in it, that they die so that the group could survive. So that there's like this self limitation in their genes, that we don't want you to become too successful of a hunter because that would jeopardize the future success of the entire group, because you're going to kill all the prey animals. So you need to self nerf yourself, that you need to be limited to a certain extent so that you would eventually die, and that would enable the group to survive for longer through generations.
Yes, that you've
Gotcha.
stated it very well. That is my account of the evolutionary meaning of aging.
Mm, that's yeah, very interesting. And yet, kind of becomes even more interesting with humans, as you said, that humans are already kind of outside of evolution, that we create our own evolution. Because in nature, it would, yeah, like be that we hunt all the animals, we eat them, and then we die. But in modern society, we're able to, I mean, not even in modern society, for thousands of years, we've practiced agriculture. So we've cultivated animals for food for thousands of years, and that kind of enables us to control our own food supply and manage it to the extent that we won't go extinct through starvation by hunting all the animals. So I guess the question is then, why would humans still die? Like, we've been doing agriculture for thousands of years, so these genes are still in us, these
Yeah, I mean,
self-limiting
we
genes.
have the self-limiting genes left over from millions of years of evolution, not the
Mm,
few thousand years that humans have been doing this. But I'd say that humans are at a crisis point now. We've
hmm.
learned, not evolved. We've learned culturally to survive in many different environments. Uh, Almost all animals have some ecosystem that they're adapted to living in, and that's where they go. They have a niche. Humans don't have a niche. We can go to Antarctica and import the food we need to live. We can live in the tropical jungles. We can bring scuba tanks and live under the water. We are not limited by environments, and that's why we've been so successful. And it's also potentially our downfall, because ultimately, I mean, we depend on ecosystems as well. We are slaughtering, we are destroying the ecosystems that human life and all life on Earth depend on.
Mm.
I'd say that there's a dangerous idea that, oh, with artificial intelligence, with hydroponic plants, we don't need nature anymore. We could live in concrete cities and grow our food hydroponically. And yeah, it'd be a shame if nature disappeared, but humans are going to go on forever because we're smart enough. And that's really dangerous. It ain't true. We still depend on ecosystems. We don't know how to create. I mean, a farm only works as a farm because there are bees that carry um, that carry the pollen. It only works because there's topsoil that's been built up over uh, thousands of years and is rapidly degrading. It only works because there are bacteria in the soil that fix nitrogen from the air. It only works because there are fungi under the ground that are connecting these different plants and transporting nutrients between them. Uh, we think we could be into. There are a lot of people, especially in the transhumanist community, in the most progressive, smartest communities of humans. We think we can outsmart nature. We don't need nature anymore. That's really a dangerous way to think. We don't understand how ecosystems work. We don't understand the vast interdependence. If we think we're going to outgrow our ecosystem and live in a completely human created artificial world, we are in trouble. We're going to kill ourselves.
Mm. Right. Yeah. I mean, there is huge, I guess, danger to ecological disasters and environmental disasters as well in the near future. Uh, but yeah, but theoretically, it is solvable, right? That we don't know yet how ecosystems work completely and how it's all interdependent. But I guess theoretically, it is also possible to fix it. It's
I don't know what you mean by theoretically. We don't understand ecosystems well enough to know what the limit is or what is a sufficient ecosystem. And, if you just have this 100 species, then you would have a self-contained ecosystem and you don't need any more than these 100. We don't know if that's true. We don't know what the 100 species are. We don't know how they regulate each other. There was one experiment, count them one, in the early 1980s, I think it was. There was Biosphere 2, a
mm,
dome in Arizona where people said, well, we're going to try the space Earth idea. We're going to seal off an environment with plenty of plants to produce the oxygen. We're going to recycle our water so that the water is purified by the ground and by the bacteria. It was the first attempt to create an artificial ecosystem that was self-contained, had all the species and the balance of species so that it could support life within this dome. Um, they were planning to go for several years to learn what they could learn about artificial ecosystems. Um, Within 2 weeks, the oxygen had gone down so far and the carbon dioxide had gone up so far, they just broke the windows. I mean, people broke the, broke the windows because they couldn't breathe anymore. Um,
mm,
it was a disaster. They couldn't grow their food. The take-home message from that experiment was that we don't nearly understand enough about ecosystems to create an artificial ecosystem. And we thought we did at that point. We thought, well, it's plants and animals and bacteria. And we thought we knew the general principles. We could put together an artificial ecosystem. And boy, were we wrong.
Mm. I think with the biosphere too, they so it's a very interesting story because it actually ties into the calorie restriction and aging,
Yeah.
which I'll do a little quick intro that, but I think they actually stay
Roy
there for
Walford, you want to tell that
yeah
story?
yeah yeah. So there was this group of scientists and doctors, or the medical doctor was Roy Walford, and he was very interested in calorie restriction, extending lifespan in animals and humans, and they did grow their food, and I think they stayed there for a bit longer than 2 weeks. They were
Oh
probably
yeah.
like
I mean, after
year, 2 years
they
or
just
something.
brought air in, but they thought,
Gotcha,
well, maybe otherwise we can be self-sustaining.
gotcha. Yeah, but they broke out because they were running on low on food, and Roy Walford was actually happy about it because he was able to do like a calorie restriction experiment in humans. He tracked all their biomarkers and body composition markers. They become like very skinny and frail during that time because of the calorie restriction.
Skinny but not frail.
Mm. Or at
They
least,
were
they lost
they
a lot
were
of weight.
they lost a lot of weight, but they were stronger and healthier in every way. So
Yeah,
I'm
their
not sure
biomarkers improved.
that Walford was interested in caloric restriction before that time. I think this might have been his introduction. He was hired as the doctor to be the doctor for the Biosphere 2 experiment.
Mm.
And it was what he learned from seeing people starving because they weren't producing enough calories to feed themselves and
Yeah,
becoming more healthy as they became less well nourished that
yeah.
really surprised him. And he turned his career towards studying what is this? Why are people healthier when they have less to eat?
Mhm. Yeah, that's what he, was intending to do, and, some of the participants, yeah, broke out because of, I guess, worry that something would go wrong, um, which, is interesting. But yeah, he did find that, their biomarkers improved, although they lost a lot of weight and they had like lower body fat. And this is, yeah, what we talked earlier, that calorie restriction has been seen to extend lifespan in virtually all species,
And
and in humans. Yeah.
health span. And people who are calorically restricted and people who both exercise and eat less are far healthier. Not just living longer as hanging on, but more vigorous, mentally more acute, not more fertile, but
Mhm.
in other ways. Um,
Yeah.
we who are keeping ourselves as slim as we can, maybe with intermittent fasting, which
Mm.
sort of tricks the body to turn on some of these starvation adaptations,
Yeah.
maybe with eating less long term, maybe with it's blood sugar that triggers the the body's life shortening mechanisms through
Mm.
the so here's a side story. The hormone insulin we think of as, well, that's what regulates blood sugar. And that's true. That's what it does in humans. But insulin is very old. There's insulin in worms that don't have blood, don't have sugar. Um, Insulin is the primary regulator of lifespan in worms. And the first genetic variants that were discovered to live much longer in worms were the ones with the DAF2 receptor mutated. What is DAF2? It's the insulin receptor. So, insulin is a life shortening hormone. If you can keep your insulin down, that's the way to uh, modestly extend your lifespan, certainly by years, not decades.
Mm. Yeah.
And you can't keep your insulin at zero because then you poison yourself with sugar, you become blind, and peripheral neuropathy in the fingers and toes. You don't want to be a diabetic with with no insulin at all. But if you
Yeah.
can lower your insulin levels to the level that insulin was when you were a child, then it's a way toward healthy life extension.
Mm. Right. I guess the challenge is that pretty much all foods have some insulinogenic effects,
Right.
maybe with the exception of if you eat like pure fat, but even in large quantities, fat can raise insulin. So, I guess then the eating frequencies, in my opinion, the most effective way to control insulin levels is to do some form of time restricted eating, because the less frequently you eat, that's like a much more powerful way of keeping your fasting insulin lower than practicing some form of carbohydrate restriction, for example.
I say it's individual. It depends on your metabolism, and it depends on what you can live with and what you feel good with. Experiment with different ways to keep your insulin down, and you'll find a diet and a schedule that works
Mm,
for you. And it doesn't have to be the same one that works for me.
yeah. What about the mTOR signaling? So that's another very known pathway of growth in the body, and it's often said to be life shortening.
And it's less well understood. Well, I should say I understand it less. I know that um, rapamycin is the best single molecule that we have for extending lifespan in rodents. It's powerful. We don't know. We don't understand how it works. It has something to do with growth, as you say. Uh, we need mTOR during our growing phase, and as we cut down mTOR activity with rapamycin, it's one of the most powerful techniques we have for extending lifespan in rodents. I personally do a course of rapamycin once a year for a few weeks, and even then, it's intermittent. Uh, I don't think daily rapamycin for the rest of your life is good for you, but I do think that you can extend lifespan with intermittent rapamycin, and the schedule is up for grabs. Nobody's done those experiments, certainly not in humans, to know what the optimum schedule or the optimum dose is. But
Hmm.
I'm convinced enough that I play with it, and I take rapamycin for a few weeks a year.
Gotcha. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about all these healthy lifestyle habits that everyone knows about exercise, and
That's what
yeah,
your listeners want to hear, isn't it? Everyone
right.
wants to know, how can I live longer?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a lot of content about it already and other podcasts about it, but I guess the bigger question is there a way to program our genes in a way that doesn't that maybe let's not talk about maybe immortality, but other ways to extend lifespan by a few decades in everyone, or 100 years or something like that. And is it actually something that we should do because of these selective pressures that you mentioned before? Would it be
Well,
harmful in any way to the
of
entire
course.
group,
I
for
mean,
example?
it's so to answer the second question first, it's absolutely um, turns on its head all of sociology, human relations, so how we live together in communities. If lifespan is doubled, say, through some intervention, is it something that's available to everybody? Is it only the rich people that can have it? Um, or are leaders going to end up uh, staying in office? I mean, whoever it is, you want your leaders to turn over every few years. You
Yeah.
don't want them to have the power of a king, where they're going to be ruler of the of a country, let alone the world, for 100 years.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
there are all kinds of issues that come with life extension. Again, good for the individual, problematic for the community. We'd certainly have to think more about birth control to keep our numbers in check so that we don't overwhelm the Earth's ecosystems. If we develop the capacity to extend our fertile lifespan, so I mean, it's not unthinkable that uh, people would have the capacity to keep reproducing for hundreds of years. Having a baby a year for several hundred years, you overwhelm the
Mm,
capacity of the Earth to support humans pretty quickly.
yeah.
Um, So, so the sociological questions are certainly challenging, and we could talk about that forever. And the question is, well, are there such technologies? And my favorite candidate is exosomes. Is that the story you want to get into next?
Yeah, like what ways are so like science obviously is trying to figure it out. How do we extend lifespan? Whether doesn't matter if someone likes it or not, but the scientists will keep researching this and trying to figure out the solution. Um, so, what are some hints? That is it gene editing? Is it some other therapeutics, regenerative medicine, or
Well, let me draw a distinction first between modest life extension by years or even a decade and radical life extension. We have an evolutionary program that assures that we're going to die, but that program is flexible. And using hormesis, we can extend life by a few years, maybe 10 or 15 years, within the range of flexibility that's already built in by evolution. So that's the low hanging fruit. And we're playing with that with caloric restriction, with rapamycin, with several small molecules that we use. It's all um, playing with the flexibility that evolution has already built in to the human lifespan. Is there a way to go beyond that? And as you say, 120 years, can we surpass that by just overriding the system? Um, so that gets into, well, there must be a clock that keeps track of how old you are. Can we reset the clock? Well, we don't know where the clock is. Maybe there are several clocks. Well, this information about how old the body is communicated to every cell in the body. Can we hack into the communication system? And there is where we've made very promising progress. Starting in, I think it was 2004, there were experiments coming out of Stanford where they sew one mouse neck into sew two mice together. If you sew an old mouse together with a young mouse, so that they're sharing the same blood supply, the same blood through the old mouse and the young mouse, we see intriguing signs that the young mouse is getting older and the old mouse is getting younger. That's called heterochronic parabiosis. Heterochronic means young and old. Parabiosis is the experiment where you sew the two mice together. So that was the beginning of there's got to be something in the blood that is communicating age information through the body. Can we hack into that system? Can we find what it is in the blood that's telling a cell, behave like an old cell or behave like a young cell? Can we rewrite the age of the body, not by hacking into the clock, but by hacking into the communication system by which the age information is sent through the body? So it was 7, 8 years ago that Harold Catcher, a friend and colleague of mine, had an inspiration about that. What is it in the blood that's carrying this information? And he guessed it was exosomes. He found an entrepreneur in India who was willing to finance him with really, by today's budgets, it was a tiny amount of money, but it was enough to do a year's worth of experiments in Mumbai, taking the exosomes from young rats and injecting them into the blood supply of old rats. What is an exosome? An exosome is a lipid nanoparticle, meaning it's a package of chemicals in a shell of lipids, fats. It's tiny compared to a cell. It's small on the size of a virus, um, and it contains DNA, RNA, little snippets of proteins, um, even sugars. Many signal molecules are in these little nanoparticles that are being released by every cell in your body all the time. That just the cell sends out through its cell wall these tiny particles, nanometers across, that contain uh, hundreds of different kind of molecular species. We're learning in the last 20 years that this is a universal biological language. It's not just within the body, but it's outside the body as well. My favorite example, if an insect comes into a forest and the forest has never seen before, the first trees that experience that insect will respond to it by altering their biochemistry to poison that kind of insect, keep it away, and will send out signals in the form of exosomes that other plants everywhere through the forest pick up these exosomes that are in the air and say, "Oh, there's a new insect in town. Here's what we can do to prepare for it." So it's not just within the body; it's um, from body to body and across species. Different species pick up the same exosomes. It seems to be a universal language. And as I said, Harold Catcher had the idea maybe it's exosomes that are carrying information about age. He did a series of experiments where he extracted exosomes from young rats, injected them into old rats, and the results were just remarkable. The rats lived, uh, they they looked healthier, they acted healthier, there was stronger, um, more stamina on the exercise machines. They performed like young rats again in these mazes and um, animal IQ tests. Their skin was healthier. They were more active and more curious. You could see their activity in the cage. It's just so easy to tell a rat that's been rejuvenated from its cellmate that's the same age but hasn't had these injections. And unfortunately, in his first experiment, he killed them all to uh, determine what is going on with their biochemistry, uh, to do all kinds of measurements. He sacrificed them all, so we didn't get to find out how long do they live. And that experiment really hasn't been done yet. How much life extension can be achieved? The the old So far this has been done. Following Harold Catcher, there were two other groups that did it. One was at the Schmidt Heart Institute in Los Angeles. The other is in Nanjing, China, the University of Nanjing. Um, those are the three labs that I know of that have been experimenting with exosomes rejuvenating rats. All of them report remarkable success, but so far it's only a handful of rats. I think less than 30 rats altogether have been rejuvenated with exosomes, and to my knowledge, only 8 have actually been left to live out their full lifespan so that we can know how much longer they live. We're very much at the beginning stage. We don't know what the potential increase in lifespan is. It's not going to be that easy. I mean, it's not like all of the 8 rats just lived and lived and lived. One of them lived to twice the average lifespan of rats, and that was a record-setting event. Others had lifespans that were extended modestly. But this is the first stage. This is the first experiment. We don't know about dosage, timing. We don't know what kinds of exosomes are most effective. Uh, I think this has tremendous potential to be perhaps uh, radically extending lifespan of animals and translating into humans. But there's a lot of research that needs to be done. And for the
Mhm.
last 3 years, every time I get invited to a conference, every time I have the ear of an entrepreneur or a, a venture capital group, I said, invest in exosomes. Exosomes are the key to life extension in the future. And to a man, they all say, well, how are we going to make money out of it? I say, I don't know. I'm a scientist. You're the entrepreneur. is that there's no patentable material here. We're going to develop the technology, and then Google is going to steal it and walk away with the profits. We're going to do all the investment, and they're going to make all the profits, and that's true. I can't argue with that, but somebody's got to fund this research because it is the most promising research in the field of life extension.
Hmm. Right. Interesting. What about gene editing? That's also so that theoretically you would directly look at the genes that regulate aging and program them in a way that would either slow down the speed of aging or break the kind of a ceiling for lifespan.
In theory, if you change the genes that cause aging, you can extend lifespan indefinitely. But in practice, I'm really not a fan of gene editing at all. Aging is programmed at the systems level, not at the cellular level. And we know that because if you put an old organ into a young body, the whole organ becomes young again. Somehow it's getting signals from the blood that tells it, oh, now I'm in a young body, I can be young again. You don't need to rewrite the genomics of every cell. You don't even need to rewrite the epigenomics. You just need to get the signaling right.
Hmm.
Um, Beyond that, we just don't know how to do it yet. We have CRISPR technology. CRISPR technology works well enough that you can see dramatic results in some of the cells in a cell line where you use CRISPR. But there are so many off targets. CRISPR works most of the time, but sometimes it goes to the wrong place and it adds your gene in a place where it's doing more harm than good. Uh, we just don't have the technology to accurately enough edit every genome in every cell of your body. If we
Hmm.
could, it probably would work, but we're decades away from doing that. And meanwhile, we have this signaling technology, which I think has promised to give you better results with less effort.
Mm. Yeah. So but I guess there are limitations to that signaling, right? So
We don't know yet. We're just at the beginning. As I say, 30 rats, and it may be 20 something rats. I'm pretty sure it's not more than 30 rats in the whole world have ever been experimented on using exosome technology. I mean, we have a world of exploratory research to be done before uh, we know what the limits are of exosome rejuvenation.
mm, yeah, that's interesting because I would imagine you're not going to be able to turn an 80-year-old to the same. I mean, maybe appearance is different, but would you be able to, let's say, turn an 80-year-old to a 20-year-old?
I think if if you look at the rats, that's exactly what they've done.
Mm,
And I'm optimistic that with maybe 50 to $100 million, a few years of animal experiments, it will be ready to try that in humans and see if it works.
hmm. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Um,
It's real age reversal. It's not just life extension. We've seen age reversal in these exosome experiments with rats, and we've only been doing it with a handful of rats so far. It's really time to extend those experiments, try lots of different things, and find out what are the limits. What can we do?
mm. Are there any other areas or different types of technology that has potential?
Well, as I say, there are lots of good technologies. I can give you. I have a website where I give lists of supplements that I take and that I recommend that you try. It's agingadvice.org.
Hmm.
So I don't keep any secrets, but all of this is working within this maybe 10-year flexibility. There's plasticity in the aging program in humans, and you can max out on that 10 years. You can get your 10 years of average life extension, and you can do that with known exercise and supplement and diet routines. But for radical life extension, exosomes are the only technology that I know that's got promise in that direction.
Gotcha. Yeah. I guess we can start wrapping up slowly. Is there anything else that
I,
we
you,
should
I mean,
cover?
you've given me a lot of slack. I've covered a lot of territory. I'm happy if you are. Is there anything else you
Mm.
want to ask?
No, I mean, yeah, like we covered. So the reasons, theoretical reasons why we age, why like in some species it's not happening, and why in some species it is. We talked about the signaling, what happens with aging. We talked a little bit about the possible options. Um, I guess the question is, what are your predictions? Like at because the science and technology in this field are advancing. There's some people like Aubrey de Grey saying that 2050, 45 or 2035. I'm not even sure exactly which year is exactly his prediction. But in the near future, some people say that there's going to be this longevity escape velocity, or like a singularity moment. Um, what is your thoughts about that?
Aubrey has a different concept of aging. He's not embraced the idea I have that it's all about signaling, that you can really solve the problem with signaling. His paradigm, I mean, he got into this work a few years before I did in the 1990s, and he's been singing the same song ever since. There are things that go wrong with the body, and we can engineer solutions to that. And I've got a different paradigm. We don't need to engineer solutions. We just need to change the signaling environment in the body. If we can do that, the body will do the work for us. We don't know how to do all these repairs at a small level. We don't know how to edit our genes. We don't know how to remove all the waste products from the body. We don't know how to detox from the oxidative damage, but we do know how to change the signaling environment and hope that the body will respond by turning an old animal in a young environment into a young animal again. We see promise with these rat experiments that that's possible. So so that's my hope. When it's going to happen, it could happen in the next 2 years if somebody is willing to put $100 million into intensive experiments with rats. Just try every which way. What kind of exosomes, on what schedule, at what age do you start, at what age do you stop? There's no guarantee that exosome rejuvenation will work. I think it's a good bet, but there's no guarantee. And if it doesn't work, I don't have any predictions for what the next thing is that will work.
Mm, gotcha. Yeah, well, this has been very interesting and eye-opening as well about the group selection pressures for aging and longevity. Um, Before I ask my last question, where can people learn more about you and your work?
Um, I have a website at agingadvice.org that has my advice for living a long time. I have a blog at agingmattersblog.org, agingmattersblog.org, that I've been less active in lately. But there's a lot in 15 years of history on that blog site. I've got a book called Cracking the Aging Code, where you can learn most of what we talked about today. So, with those three things, but I've got a lot of diversity in my uh, ideas, and I've moved away in recent years from aging research, and I'm writing poetry. I'm doing research in other fields of science, which I also think need a radical rewrite. And I have another blog called unauthorizedscience.org, where you can see my other work unrelated to aging. Unauthorizedscience.org. There it
All right.
is.
Yeah, we'll put the links in the show notes. My last question is, what's this one piece of advice or habit you wish you adopted sooner?
Experiment on yourself, learn what works on you. What works for me might not necessarily work for you. Um, Exercise like a demon to the extent that you can stand it. And my favorite supplement is NAC. Take NAC every day.
Yeah, that's a good supplement. Well, yeah, it was great to talk with you, and yeah, looking forward to your future work.
Thanks. Thanks for reaching out to me. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for being open to letting me rant about all these topics that I'm passionate about.
Yeah, of course, my pleasure.